All right, so we're back here with Magic Dick, and we were talking about the Geils Band and the ins and outs of making music when the band really got, well, in general, but when the band really got big, it got much more intense, and at the same time, you guys had a certain method to being able to construct songs and put out records.
Yeah.
And how much touring, like what was the most touring you guys ever did in 1 year?
Usually the touring would involve, like, say, 2 or 3 weeks. You go to a region of the country.
Right.
You know, call it a hub.
Yeah, the Midwest.
And from that hub.
Fly out of that.
Yeah, from that hub you would do it, you know.
Right.
I remember in the 70s, we were flying in Learjets.
Right.
These little Learjets.
Right.
That would take off like this. They go.
Right.
I mean, it was like...
Did you guys have any close calls?
A couple of times in some prop planes. I remember coming in.
Was this
toward
like private?
Yeah,
okay.
And coming in during a storm.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, it was real cloudy and everything. Suddenly you break through the clouds and you realize you're like this far above the treetops. It's like, whoa!
Yeah. That would be scary.
But it was all fun. But I particularly enjoyed the Learjet stuff. I took a lot of photographs back then of just, you know, I was sort of a photojournalist at heart.
Right.
If I wasn't doing this music thing, I'd be a photographer.
Now, did you start that in the band, or was that prior to the band?
I started as a kid.
Oh,
when
did
I was
you really?
eight years
Okay.
old. I was getting into. I was given a box camera and a little developing
like a Rolodex or something.
No, it was a little cheap box camera.
Yeah.
You know, that took negatives about this size.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and you'd contact print them with this little printer, and I just loved that. You know, absolutely loved it. But then, in the starting in 1970, is when I got a Leica, a 35 millimeter Leica, which is the.
And by this time, you guys had the band going.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Needed to have the band going to be able to
afford all that stuff.
To buy a Leica and carry all that around.
Yeah.
And for a period of time, for a couple of years, I was, I had the photojournalist definitive thing with, you know, a case on a shoulder strap.
Right.
You know, and the case held the Leica with one lens on it, and then two other additional lenses, so a 3-lens kit. You know. After not too long, I got tired of carrying all that around and reduced it all down to just one camera, one lens, you know. And then I got even tired of that and went strictly to a spy camera, the Minox, little push-pull thing.
Oh, wow.
You've seen these in movies all the time. Yeah. It actually is an official spy camera. But
so
there
would you
was
be spying on the band?
Well, I was just the guy who had a camera ready, and this camera was so quiet when you fired it, it would just be like
nobody could hear it. Yeah.
Didn't even make a click. It was just like you couldn't hear it beyond a foot away, you know. And the beauty of the thing was, it was a type of camera that you could set the focus to a particular distance, say like 6 feet, and you didn't have to focus it. Because it had great depth of field, used a curved film plane, which anyway translated to, you didn't have to bother focusing critically like you do, you know, with your typical camera. So this camera was perfect for swift, unknown shooting. You know, it just, you know, and I was good at it.
I bet. I'd love to see your.
Several of these shots are on. Several of these shots were used in a collage on the 2-album live thing called "Blow Your Face Off."
I know exactly which one you mean.
That whole collection on the paper sleeves
on the inside. Yeah,
those are all my photos.
Wow. Okay, I'll check that out.
Yeah,
because I think we have that. So the other thing I forgot to mention is how you got your moniker. And you were Richard Salwitz.
Yeah.
And then Danny Klein apparently came up. You could have been Pittsfield Slim for life.
Yeah.
And what a boring life that would have been.
Yeah, I wasn't. I didn't think Richard Salwitz, all due respect to my mom and dad and my name,
Right.
you know, and I'm proud of being Richard. I'm Richard Salwitz.
Of course
That's who I am, you know. But back then, getting into just getting into this whole music scene,
Right.
it was like,
And the blues.
especially blues.
The blues.
There are all these Chicago players who had these cool names, you know, like well, there's a million of them.
Yeah, Little Walter, Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf.
Exactly. Howlin' Wolf, yeah. They all had this image to their
Sonny Boy Williamson,
exactly.
Junior Wells, Buddy Guy.
Yeah, you got all of them, you know.
Yeah.
It's like, so my thinking was, I need a name like that, you know.
Right.
And so this was very, I'd say in 1968, 69, Danny and I, we lived together, and Jay, the three of us, we lived together. But it was one day, Danny and I were, you know, having fun and thinking about this name thing. And, you know, different things, you know, the Pittsfield Slim thing just wasn't even though I had heard of, I think there's like a Chicago Slim.
There is a Chicago Slim, or there was.
Yeah.
Right.
It just wasn't making it for me, you know. So suddenly, Danny had this stroke of
genius
inspiration. Danny goes, I got it. Magic Dick.
And your sex life was never the same.
From that moment, once I, you know, adopted that name, it just seemed like, well, that's it.
Yeah.
You know, how could it not be?
Yeah.
You know?
Blow your face off, nigga.
Yeah, so the name thing has apparently served me well.
Yeah.
But I will tell you this, you know, when we came up with that name, there was no internet.
Right.
There was no email.
Right.
There was no none of that.
It's hard to imagine what it would have been like if you came up with it now.
Thinking about it, you know, thinking about it now, I think more than twice about adopting that name with things the way they are today, you know.
I've had fans of the blog go, I would never have that name or something like that. Right. Or women go, what does that name mean? Yeah,
it's just loaded with double entendres, and it has actually been an endless sort of source of amusement.
I'm sure it has.
And I totally enjoy it. In the 70s, I remember we were in New York City, and I wanted to get some cool boots, you know. So I went to this shoe and boot store in New York City. It's kind of an upscale place, you know. So I walked in there and I'm looking around, and this gorgeous sales lady came over to me and asked if she could help me. I said, yes, thank you very much. And I explained to her I'm in show business and, you know, what I'm what I'm kind of looking for, you know. And she asked me, well, what's your name? I said, my name's Magic Dick. And she goes, boy, I sure could use one of those. So that's the kind of stuff I get.
Jeez, yeah, I can imagine,
along with how could you ever call yourself that?
Right.
Or you know, somebody else say like if I was talking about putting out a custom harp of my own or something like that, you know, some guy would go, I'd never play a harmonica called Magic Dick.
I'd never put one of those in my mouth.
You're right, you know. So all of it is just, it's more, the name ends up being more revealing about the other people involved in that circle.
In the band, yeah.
Well, no, I don't mean the band. In fans,
right? In fans, yeah.
It's their reaction to it it's more about them than about me.
Right. I can get that. So now, why was Jay why was he J. Geils and not, his real name was Jerome?
His real name is John.
John, okay.
John Geils.
So how did he become J? That just was,
Well, from the
again,
moment, he liked to be called Jay.
Oh, okay.
And sometimes Jay,
Right.
you know. But that got contracted to J period
Right.
for the band name. You
Right.
know? We were never actually where you'd spell out J,
Right.
J-A-Y,
Right.
Geils, you know.
Right.
The J period Geils was that's what worked good.
And what's Peter's last name? You'll leave that alone? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. But basically, almost everybody in the band had some kind of moniker or a stage name, other than Danny Klein and
Right.
Seth. Yeah.
Right.
And
Seth
Steve
was
and Joe.
Yeah, Steve and Joe. That
Yeah.
was his actual given name. And
So three
Seth
of you
didn't,
had.
Seth
kind of-
didn't use any
Right.
nickname.
Yeah.
He didn't need to. He was so cool looking.
Right.
You know, Seth.
He did look like a rock and roller, didn't he?
Absolutely.
Yeah, he really did.
Seth had a huge amount to do with moving us in that rock and roll direction. you
Right.
know?
Away
And-
from just the
and-
strict blues R&B
Yeah,
thing.
right.
Yeah.
And Peter
And
too.
originals, probably, too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And at one point, you guys would write songs together, and I think it would say Juke Joint Jimmy.
Yes.
And I always
I'm glad
wondered, who's Juke Joint Jimmy? And I realized later, I think you told me that was kind of your pseudonym for everybody.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah. If a composition was by the whole band,
right.
with
And it became
everybody,
Juke Joint
then
Jimmy.
it was Juke Joint Jimmy.
Yeah. Interesting.
Now there is a guy who plays harp and plays around with bands.
Right.
A lot of people know. He calls himself Juke Joint Jimmy.
I think I've seen him on Facebook.
Sure.
I know you were talking about one song where you took a Louis Armstrong song
Yeah.
and worked it up with J. Geils Band.
Yeah.
And what was that?
I brought that song to the band. I suggested, I really think we could do something with this song. It's called "I'm Not Rough."
Mm-hmm.
It was recorded in 1927. Louis Armstrong on cornet or trumpet. It was a period there where he transitioned from cornet to trumpet, and it's like bop boo dee doo, beep boo dee doo. Beep boo doo dee boo boo dee boo ba ba doo. That type of and his wife at the time, Lil Armstrong,
Okay, yeah.
played
The
piano.
Yeah.
And I believe that this tune was her composition. She's credited with it.
Okay.
I liked what she brought to that whole thing. I don't think she was considered like a fantastic pianist. But there was something about her.
She had ideas.
She had ideas. She had the
Right.
groove. I had this idea that we could cover that tune, and we could transition from the country blues sound that it starts with.
Mm-hmm.
We could transition to, by the time we're working on the out choruses of it, to have it transition to a more modern thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the original the recording that we got the whole thing from, there's a trombone solo in the recording, and Jay simulated the sound of that trombone, the slide trombone. He simulated that really great by playing slide guitar,
Interesting.
and it just worked great.
Yeah.
Just worked.
So
great.
how did that work in terms of a copyright? Did you guys give the copyright to Louis Armstrong or Lil Armstrong?
Oh yeah, it
Yeah,
definitely.
okay.
Yeah,
And what was the name of that song?
I'm Not Rough.
I'm Not Rough.
Yeah,
And that was on one of your later records, right?
yeah, that was on Monkey Island.
Right. Okay.
That was still on Atlantic at that point.
Yeah. Okay.
And speaking of the Atlantic connection, I'd like to talk a little bit about
Sure.
this. Actually,
Yeah. Ahmet Ertegun.
Ahmet Ertegun. Ahmet Ertegun was a friend of mine. Not that I don't mean to say like we're like the way we're friends,
right.
but Ahmet loved me and I loved him. And he would sometimes come by when we'd be recording in the studio. He'd sometimes come in, you'd see him sitting behind the board just grooving, He was there when we cut Where Did Our Love Go?
Mm-hmm.
But Ahmet had this thing. He had this groove, and he was a true soulmate when it came to love of Louis Armstrong.
Right.
So when he knew that, he heard us recording "I'm Not Rough," he was like, "Man, this is..."
Yeah, that's cool.
He loved it.
That's cool.
And so Ahmet was very special, And then to go from all of that to Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young,
right, or Cream,
all of that. I mean, was kind of like, this is a true music man.
Yeah.
When Ahmet started, he came from Turkey, I think it was.
Son of an ambassador.
And he would travel around with these records in the trunk of his car.
Right, in the South.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know exactly where, but he just was into it. And
he was sort of in that same school of guys like Leonard Chess and they were all kind of that.
Right.
King Records or whatever.
Yeah, and Ahmet knew and worked with Ray Charles.
Well, yeah, they were. He was
even wrote
contracted
and also wrote a couple of tunes that Ray recorded.
Yeah. I've heard the story. I've heard about that was that when Ray left Atlantic, that pretty much broke him up, and that he kind of almost backed out of the picture a little more. Yeah. When that happened.
Yeah. Well, Atlantic couldn't meet the money that was coming from.
Exactly.
I forget.
Yeah, I think he went to ABC.
And Ray was great no matter what.
He was great no matter what, but I have to say the Atlantic stuff is just, it's some of the greatest stuff he ever did.
I know one that Ahmet wrote was called "Do the Mess Around."
Oh, he wrote that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Now the other thing about Ahmet that was special, Ahmet wasn't just this record guy who had his office at he was the chairman of the board at Atlantic.
Right.
But Ahmet had this social life. Ahmet went out a lot. He would come to shows. And what was really special for me was having Ahmet like over here in the wing of the stage, watching, like 20 feet away from watching me. Right. And people in the audience didn't know that Ahmet was standing right there watching. And so that naturally gave a lot more impetus to me to
impress him,
just do, really be on deliver, Right. And the other guy who was really great too, but we didn't have that much of a relationship with, was Jerry
Wexler.
Jerry Wexler. Jerry Wexler is actually the one who signed us to Atlantic.
Wow.
Now, that was one of those contracts. That was one of those contracts where you pay to make records. Right. There was a record promo guy whom I love, we all loved, named Mario Medias. Right. The Big M. Right. And Mario was up in Boston. Mm-hmm. I forget what he was doing up there. Maybe he came up to see us. Mm-hmm. We were playing at the old original Boston Tea Party. Right. On
very historic club.
Yeah. It was like a big.
It was almost like a Fillmore type.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was very much the Fillmore of Boston.
With the light shows. This was the psychedelic era. With the light shows and light shows on the ceiling everywhere. You're surrounded, and man, did they do great light shows then. Right. It was fabulous. But so Mario one night saw us perform, and he told Jerry Wexler about seeing us. He said, "Jerry, I saw this group. You should sign these guys." Wow. Yeah.
That's heavy.
It was heavy.
So he went to bat for you.
And Mario, as a few years went by, we eventually, after not too long, we were headlining at Madison Square Garden.
Jeez.
And that was a very proud moment for Mario.
I would think.
Mario Medias.
The other story I really like is the one about who was the television show that you guys would go on in New York?
The Joe Franklin Show.
Right.
Now, Peter had been watching Joe Franklin for years. The rest of us didn't know about him, but Wolf, growing up in Brooklyn. Right. And it was that kind of show where Joe would have these guests on. He was like an early version of the Tonight Show or something, but on a much different level, And so we went up to Joe Franklin's show when we came out with Freeze Frame.
Right.
And we did a video where, well, those of you who have seen this video, you'll see at one point we're standing there and we pull a chain. Each one of us pulls a chain and a big bucket of latex paint.
Oh, that's
different
right.
colors, you know.
I have
red,
seen that.
Green,
I have seen that. Yeah.
Red, green, blue, all
I've
of
seen
this.
that. Yeah.
Man, what a mess. And by the time we finished doing that, you couldn't clean yourself up there. I mean, this was going to take special work. I remember taking the limo back to the UN Plaza Hotel, which is where we were staying. And the limo was a mess. Black limo, black interior, solid.
So did the
black
record
limo.
company have to pay for that?
I don't know who paid for it. My God, what a mess. To this day, I still have a bunch of this different paint on my soprano saxophone case.
Wow. Terrific.
Oh, man, it was a mess. I made a total mess of the limo. And the elevator going up at the UN Plaza was covered in this paint. Anything you touched. So but that was a very fun thing to do, actually.
Yeah. Well, I bet. Yeah. But that was on his show?
Yeah.
Wow.
And we may have been on his show a couple of times. It was a funny thing to do that, and Wolf knew him, so Wolf was all excited about, Joe Franklin getting on the Joe Franklin
because
show.
he had seen him, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So the other thing I talked to you about recently that to me is really interesting was just the, and we used it for the Blowout t-shirt, was this photo of you playing in a JFK Stadium in front of like 100,000 people, and I think you said you were headlining. And
I can't remember whether we
headlined.
I'll bet we were.
Yeah.
I think we probably were headlining, judging from the way the stage was set up, because we were using the whole stage.
Right.
If you're not headlining,
you only use part
you're
of it.
a small part of it, and you're set up in front of somebody else.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we were headlining it.
So just that whole thing of the that transfer of going from club work to stadium work is such an intense change.
Yeah.
And the idea of playing to like 100,000 people or 50,000 people, and it's you guys that are the actual draw.
Right.
That is such an intense thing, and at the same time, you said you got used to that, and it didn't take that long to really get used to it.
I think I was always sort of looking forward to having that be the case, because I like to use the whole stage, like when I'm performing.
Yeah.
Especially when I'm soloing, And back then, I wasn't using a wireless mic, you know. So I got into this whole technique of, it was a wired connection from the static mic.
Right.
It was like on a 20 or 25 foot cable.
Mm-hmm.
And, I would go back and forth across the stage. And I had to develop this thing of like doing sort of a whipping action with the harp mic to pull the, to snake the cord to come along with me. I do like a little whip action, and it would send a wave down the cord.
Wow.
And it would follow me, So I had this technique of getting that to work great. But then when I transitioned finally to wireless, man, wireless is it.
Now, were you doing wireless by the 80s? Was that the deal? Okay.
I had an early version of a Nady wireless system.
Right.
It's a little pack about the size of a pack of cigarettes.
Yeah.
In making the transition to using a real good vocal mic, like any singer would use, my thinking about it was, and I'm proud of this thought, because this shows you how I think about this stuff. It's like the voice, the sound of singers became very important to me, as I got more and more into singing and thinking about this whole idea. So I had this thought, like, if the sound of somebody's voice can move you that much, and it's clean. You know, whatever acoustic sound is coming out of their mouth, and all these singers sound different, yet they can really move you. You know, there's no gimmickry involved. You know, it's not like a distortion sound. You know, so I wanted to utilize this idea of a good acoustic sound from the harp, and treat it purely into a singer's mic,
right?
Not a bullet mic.
Right.
You know,
no distortion.
No distortion.
Yeah.
And so that's what I love to this day. However, what we're doing now in this stuff we're doing, I'm doing the old technique of a green bullet straight into a twin, and that green bullet overdrives the input to that amp a lot, but it really barks. So I mean, it's another approach. You know.
Yeah.
And,
it's two different worlds between each of
It's
those.
two different worlds, yeah.